It's another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. But before we get into it, are you subscribed? If not, please make sure to subscribe, like and share the video and spread the word. Because the Christian Reeve podcast is here to stay. I love doing this and I love all of you that support me. So thank you. And yeah, let's get into this podcast, shall we? Boom! Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest has an unbelievable resume. So I'm just going to list just a few of the things that this lady does. So she is a professional writer, an editor, a traveler, a public speaker, a foreign correspondent, and many other titles. She goes by the name Christina Hoag. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Christian. Thanks for having me on today.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Like I said, I was just kind of bewildered by like so many different titles. And viewers won't know this, but I actually asked Christina before we did the podcast if I could have more time with her. Because honestly, there's so much to ask you and so many different areas to kind of dive in as far as like your professional career and your personal life and everything. And it's a really fascinating story. And some of this stuff I identify with, like, you know, living abroad and stuff like that. And yeah, that seems like an appropriate place to jump in, actually. So as far as like traveling and living in different countries is concerned, you have visited 72 different countries around the world. Talk to us a little bit about the places you've been and the greatest experiences that you've had while traveling.
Well, I should preface that I was sort of born traveling, and my parents met in northern Rhodesia. What was then northern Rhodesia is now Zambia in Africa. My mother's from England and my father from New Zealand, and they were in a copper mining town near the border of Congo. So when my mother was 7 months pregnant with me, my father whisked her off to New Zealand, and then I was born. And 3 weeks later, we were traveling off to a gold mine in Fiji. My father was a mining engineer. So again, I've been traveling since even before I was born, you know, in utero. So it's just been, you know, I've lived in many places. I grew up moving from country to country, and then as an adult, I lived in three other countries: Spain, Guatemala, and Venezuela. And that was probably the greatest experiences I had. It was, I worked as a foreign correspondent, I was a journalist, and, you know, I just have these great adventures sort of around traveling to do stories. And, you know, sometimes the adventure was the story, sometimes the adventure wasn't quite the story. It was, you know, getting to the story or what have you. So I'd say that was the most adventurous, was traveling around Latin America, South America, and some pretty rough spots sometimes.
In terms of the countries that you've lived in, how did this affect, because obviously you mentioned, yeah, you were growing up, and obviously that's a lot for a child to take on, you know, moving from place to place. Obviously, if that is what you understand to be sort of life or normality, then there is that as well. But it cannot be easy. And one of the things I wondered is, how did this affect your life growing up? And then how does it compare with, you know, being an adult expat? Because obviously there is differences between both. Like, how would they compare in your experiences?
Yeah, well, you know, it wasn't until a few years ago that I found I have a name. I'm a third culture kid. That's what they call children who grow up sort of as expats, you know, traveling as their parents move around. It could be with the military, diplomats, or as in my case, a business, we call a business brat, business things, or sometimes missionaries also that fall into that.
Oh, right, yeah, that's right.
So I'm a, you know, and it was sort of like this great thing to find, like I had a tribe, I had a community, because my whole life, when you grow up, you know, moving from country to country, you don't really feel like you're from anywhere. So that, you know, very simple, easy question, where are you from, really is like a huge dilemma for me whenever it's asked. And I go through this whole mental exercise, like, you know, should I go through the whole story, or should I just tell, like, oh, I'm just from, you know, New Jersey, which is where we landed sort of in when I was in high school. Just make it that the easiest thing. So it's always, the question of identity and home and belonging becomes very complex, because you don't really belong anywhere. And, as someone said to me, you have a lot of allegiances, Christina. And I said, yeah, I mean, things like the Olympic Games, I have different
Yeah.
places I cheer on. So it just creates a much more, complicated growing up, and compared to what, if you're an adult and you start traveling, like my parents, for example, you're already from somewhere, you have a hometown, you have a family rooted in one area. So life is just, that bit much simpler. And it's something that I always envied, as I got into my 20s, I was like, oh, I really wanted to be from one place, to grow up in one place and have one school where I knew all the kids, from kindergarten to through high school. And, it just seems so idyllic to me. And of course, other people looking at me think I had this really glamorous sort of upbringing, traveling around the world and whatnot. So it's, so there's pros and cons to both.
It's interesting you say that as well, yeah, because I'd met a few kids growing up who were in a similar situation, maybe not so awesome as getting to travel to many different countries, but for instance, there was a girl I grew up with who I believe her family was from America or something like that, so she would sometimes spend 3 or 4 months over there and then come back, and you could tell when she had, because her accent was suddenly much more American, and she'd be like, oh yeah, I was stateside for a bit. But you touched on a great point there. I mean, this whole identity thing, I mean, it's interesting because I remember when I was growing up, I used to kind of ignorantly kind of think like, well, if you're born in a place, that's where you're from. But I mean, there's so many instances of people where they're born in a place, but then maybe they spend like 5 minutes there and then they go somewhere else. And it's like, can you really say you're from that place if you weren't there? And I think, yeah, it really comes down to where you grow up. I think that's more an accurate representation of where you're from. And yeah, sorry to be annoying, but I'm kind of intrigued now. Since, you've spent a lot of sort of years in various different places and you're in a different place now, where would you actually consider yourself being from? Or maybe a better question would be, which country do you most closely identify with?
I suppose it has to be United States. I mean, I came here as a teenager, went to high school here, and then went to university here and worked for a while. And then I went traveling for 10 years, and I came back. So this is probably the closest I'm from. But even here, I've lived in New Jersey, Boston, Miami, and now I live in Los Angeles. So it's not even, from, and I don't feel particularly, sometimes I just don't feel particularly American per se or patriotic about it, but I'm here. But it's interesting you say that because, I was born in New Zealand. So if I meet, Kiwis and I say, oh yeah, I was born in New Zealand, they say, oh, where? And I say, oh, Oamaru in South Island. Oh yeah. And then they'll say, oh, I'm from such and such a place. And, and of course I don't know it, because I don't know New Zealand that well. And we did live there when I was a small child for about 4 years, where I started school there. But still, I don't know, not intimately acquainted with New Zealand. And I've had to sort of bone up on New Zealand so I can kind of feel a bit more of a Kiwi. But still, it remains, it's funny. And then people are like, oh, yeah, do you know so and so and this and that? And I'm like, no, not really. So I'm not really from there either, even though I was born there.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. Like, even for me, like the most time I've ever spent in another country was more recently when I lived in Estonia for 3 years. And I must say, as I was growing up, I did feel sort of British, but then I kind of had this period of disillusionment in my early 20s where I was like, I started to resent where maybe I just resented London. I'm not a big fan of where I'm from London. I don't live in London anymore. I haven't for many, many years. But sorry to everyone who listens who's from London, but you don't need me to repeat all the reasons why I don't like it. But anyway, I obviously, went to university, went abroad, came back, and one of the reasons that I came back was that I really had homesickness, and I never felt that way about England before. And now that I've come back, I'm very happy to be back here. But I do kind of have that second home thing where I miss Estonia, and I very much identify with Estonia as well. And I've always had that feeling of more closely identifying with Europe, because, you know, while there might be things that you identify with and that you feel are part of your personality, things you remember from growing up and so on and so forth, right? There's always stuff that you don't necessarily identify with. And for me, that was a lot of different things. And I suppose after spending so much time away and then coming back, I kind of feel like, okay, well, maybe you don't have to, you know, be stuck to one place. You can just kind of pick and choose, just like you do with everything else. You know, like some people choose to stick with one religion, some people choose to have many different things. That's me as well. You know, I like to pick and choose and whatever makes sense for me. And, you know, I think that's a very interesting thing, you know, when you have people that are patriots versus when you have people that are expats. Like it's a different way of life, which I think you can only truly appreciate when you start traveling yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's funny because when you travel around, you pick up things from each place. And it's like when I came back to America from living in Venezuela for 7 years, I couldn't drink American style coffee. It just seemed like water. And I was just like, oh God, this is not coffee. And also Spain, you know, Spain is a huge, I mean, it's the best coffee. I mean, you have a little cup of coffee in a bar, and, you know, you just sort of down it at the bar, and then and it's so caffeinated, you just kind of bounce out onto the, you know, street, you know, it's so caffeinated. So I can't drink that coffee, any American coffee anymore. I have to have an espresso machine, and I make my espresso.
It's mad. When I met my ex-girlfriend, like, she essentially introduced me to good coffee. And before that, I remember showing her, like, I went and bought coffee, and like I was used to getting like this, I don't even know what it is now. It's like Kenko powdered coffee, something horrible like that. And that's what I grew up on. That's what we had, right? And I think I tried like espresso coffee like once, but it tasted like disgusting and it was too strong, blah, 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 blah. But basically, I just hadn't had good coffee. And there was other things that I hadn't had that were good. Like I'd never had good vodka, for example. In England, I mean, in a standard store, you just can't find good vodka. And it's not that I'm like a big alcoholic or something. It's just that it's interesting to me that when I did come back, and as you say, similar situation, you try to find things that, oh, well, I had this abroad and it was amazing. I want to try and find it in my home country. And it's like, you either have to really go out of your way to find like a specialist store or something, or maybe import it, or you just can't find it. Like when it comes to coffee, for me, a lot of the time I either have to go for like the most expensive coffee I can find that's just like okay, like normal, or I have to compromise for something that's like passable, but what I wouldn't deem to be like normal. Do you know? It's like, well, this will do because it keeps me awake, but it's not coffee. So I totally get where you're coming from on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, in Australia, I grew up most of my childhood in Australia. So, you know, there you eat meat pies, and also in New Zealand. And, you know, coming to the United States, they don't have meat pies here. You know, it's hamburgers. And so it's like, you know, when you see a meat pie, there's a couple Aussie places here in LA. There's a big Aussie population actually for the film industry. A lot of them come over for acting and what have you. You know, so there is a couple like meat pie places. I'm like, oh my God, a meat pie, sausage rolls, you know. You know, you can get it, and it becomes like a big thing to seek out these little tiny things you take for granted in the other country, you know, and they're just like, you know, silly things. Or
do you have like, because I'm intrigued now, do you have like British shops or like English? Yeah, like so like you could go in there and maybe get some like Tesco stuff or something. Like I'm going.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely, and that's another thing. You know, my mother was English, from Plymouth, and so we grew up on, you know, cottage pie, shepherd's pie, and
Yeah.
you know, we always had Marmite, not Vegemite, and things like that. So now I buy them. You can buy them off Amazon. I get Marmite sent from England, and Cadbury's drinking chocolate. And then there are British shops. There's one actually here in Santa Monica where I live. There are quite a few Brits around. I think they seem to go to the warm weather spots, either Florida or
Yeah.
California is where the big British expats are. So yeah, so I go in there and find things, I mean, Dettol, custard powder. That was the other thing. I made a trifle the other day, and that was like a big treat. And I had to
Oh,
go
I love
in
trifle.
search of the bird's custard powder. Things like that. So it is this weird, so it's, my life is sort of this weird amalgam of different, influences.
How has living in other countries and traveling like on such a frequent basis like shaped your perspective on life?
Yeah, I think it just made you see the world as like a bigger global perspective rather than just a narrow perspective. Having lived in Latin America, for example, in very unstable countries where the economy and the politics are both pretty unstable, and you come back to America where it's just so stable, except for lately, which now, in the last month or two, it's been like Bolivia. I'm like, am I living really in the
Yeah.
USA, or is this like Bolivia? But it's but you learn to sort of see your own country, or different places, and with a different eye. And like you said, you were sort of down on things in the UK, and when you go abroad, say, you kind of appreciate things like having a protest against the government and standing in the street, things like that. Just different laws and things. So you end up with a bigger perspective on how things also impact people's lives, such as crime. I mean, in Latin America is a huge crime problem. The police are just ineffective. I mean, it's just just ineffectual. There's no real strong policing system. So you learn to appreciate having rule of law and having police who actually solve crimes. So it becomes a much more you just gain much more perspective, I think, on things.
When it comes to policing over there, like, do you... Okay, this is how I'm going to phrase the question. So in the UK, we have a very responsive police service in the sense that, like, even if there's like a small disturbance, they will respond, they will be there. They might take their time, but they'll be there, right? When it comes to these Latin American countries you've lived in, is it the sort of situation where they look at like quote unquote, like the level of the crime and then base the decision on whether or not they're going to come on that, or like, what exactly is the system there as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, it's hard to say. You don't see a lot of police like patrolling around or walking around. It's almost like an invisible sort of thing. They're very undermanned.
Okay.
That kind of, there's just not a lot. They're very poorly paid. So, which is, they're also very corrupt, the saying would be in Caracas, for example, at night, if you were driving at night, you wouldn't stop at a red light, because if you stopped at a red light, you would get assaulted by a band of, it was an excuse for a band of thugs.
Wow.
And the police would be, nowhere around. So you'd sort of slow down, see if anybody's good, and then just whip across the intersection. And police just weren't really around. And I think one of the things, if they responded, it would be the level of the crime and who was involved. If it was a wealthier person, they had better show up. If it's someone in the barrio, it's just another dead person, poor person, or what have you. So it's, and very low rate of solving crimes.
How did you, protect yourself when you were there? Like, I assume that a lot of the time you were traveling sort of alone for work. Is that right? Okay. So
yeah.
What measures did you take, or what did you do to kind of protect yourself as best you could?
I didn't do anything too much. I mean, I was being a woman, you're not that much of a threat. I mean, so that can work for you in that way. It can also make you more vulnerable.
Right.
But I would do things like not go out at night, really, unless I was, with someone. I wouldn't walk the streets at night. I never wore jewelry, and I still don't if I travel. Earrings, even a watch. One time I got assaulted in Lima, Peru. I just had a cheap watch with a plastic band on it, and it had a buckle. And I'm just walking, it was a Sunday morning, I'm just walking on the street, and some kid comes around, just grabs my hand and tries to take the watch. So I'm in this like push and pull you thing. And finally he gave up, and then he just walked off. I think he was high on something, but he couldn't get it off because it was a buckle. So I thought, so after that, I always just put my watch inside my shirt around my bra strap. I would like buckle it up to my bra strap, so nothing that would, show any, thing that people would want. I would wear my backpack on my front, not my back, things like that, just common sense things. I wouldn't drink, in bars or anything like that, especially alone. I would just stay at home and read, stay in the hotel and read or something. But yeah, so you had to take care. And then when I was going into dangerous areas, a lot of slums, for example, I would go in with an escort, somebody
Right.
from that area or that that was sort of known or what have you. So I had an escort into dangerous sort of places.
Wow. This is one of the reasons why I really wanted to interview Christina, because there's just so many stories. Like even when I was just reading your website, I remember just looking at the blurb and just going, this is one cool person. This is like, you could make a movie about this sort of stuff. But what you were saying, just going back to the measures you took, I remember doing something similar. Even when I was on holiday in America, I remember hearing bad stories about what can happen. And I recommend that anyone traveling, obviously after COVID, try this. So what I did is I loaded up I don't know what it's called. It's like a traveler's card. You can get it in the UK. You can get it at the post office. And I put some money on that. I think I put like half of the money I had on that. So loaded it up on the card, and then the rest I had in cash. And what I did then is I split the cash across various different things. So some in my luggage, some on me, some in other places. And then the card, I would put, I'd always keep my stuff in like my shoes, which sounds mental, but trust me, if you do get robbed, no one's going to be like robbing your socks, or it's very unlikely they're going to be doing that. The most they'll do is be like, give me money, and like they'll take it from your pocket or hold you at gunpoint or something. But that way, you're not completely screwed, because if you do get robbed, it's like, okay, well, I'm short of like $20 now, but I've still got this money in my pocket, in my shoes, and I'm okay, kind of thing. I think it's always worth kind of thinking about it, especially if you go to far less stable countries where you're actively told like, hey, listen, it's like this. Like you said, you don't wear jewelry in public, you don't wear this, you don't wear that. And a lot of the time I tend to try, even in England, like if it's not absolutely necessary, I don't carry around money with me. I just kind of keep it simple, so if people do try and rob you, there's nothing to rob, So
Yeah, another thing I had was a small change purse. So I just keep small notes and change. So if I bought something in a shop, all the people would see was this small thing. And then, I would have either the bigger notes tucked further into the backpack, or sometimes I'd leave them locked in my duffel bag or suitcase in the hotel room, which, but again, I always locked suitcases in hotel rooms also, is another thing.
And that's another thing as well, is you've got to be careful of is people raiding your suitcases in your hotels. Like that happens. I think you got to be very like strategic of like where you hide this stuff. So like, for example, if you have a suitcase and you've got like an inside, sometimes you can zip the inside of, and hide it like in a very unusual place, then it works, because they will search everywhere. And it's just, I hate to be that kind of like cynic, but it does happen. And to be fair, it happens anywhere in the world. Yeah, it's not anywhere specific, but there are countries where it's more commonplace. And I guess another thing as well is like, if you're on holiday in some of the I suppose like poorer countries, then you immediately draw attention to yourself just by being there. Like you being there,
Exactly.
it's almost like an advertisement for like, hey, I have money. It's like,
you stand out, I would stand out, just the way I look. So people would, notice me, and, they know you have money probably and what have you. So I had as I said, a few scary things, but nothing's ever really happened to me. Yeah, I would zip money into like a zipped compartment in my cosmetic bag or something, someplace
It's a good idea, actually, yeah.
Hide it at the bottom.
Right, yeah. No one's going to be robbing lipsticks, actually. As we draw it to a close for the traveling section of the interview, wow, that sounds so official. What are the key benefits and drawbacks of this lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, the drawbacks are, you feel a bit like a rolling stone. You don't put down roots anywhere. And so you can feel a bit, rootless, and friendships sort of come and go. You know, you make friends in a particular place, then you move on. So it's hard to keep in contact with the people you left, you know, because they can't really relate to where, you know, you're the place where you are then. Although you can relate to them and the place you left, it's not really relevant anymore because you're finding your way in a new place. So that's one of the major drawbacks, is just, I'd say, just human relationships, you know, and say you do, you know, meet another expat that you really get along with, and they'll be moving on, you know, they're moving on to some new place. So it's a very transient community and lifestyle. But on the other hand, you just, you know, the pros are you just learn an incredible amount. Every day was sort of an adventure. You would learn something, and just to see different things and experience different things. And learn about. So I think you have to have an innate sense of curiosity, just, you know, really curious about it and willing to be adventurous, and sometimes take risks to, you know, for that. But to me, it's just sort of a high, you know, of traveling to different places like that and seeing. The more different to me, the better. I don't, you know, some people's idea of travel is going on a cruise, you know, and that's, you know, that's fine. It's not my idea of travel. But, you know, you know, it's, to me, it's just, you know, fascinating, just humanity and the things that we all share. That's one thing I've learned through travel, is we're all more alike than different. You know, if you go to all different cultures, people want the same thing. They want to be able to live in peace. They want to, you know, raise their kids, have good opportunities for the kids. That's really what people want everywhere, at the core of it. And then, you know, then there's all this culture, religion, and whatnot sort of over that. But when you get beyond that, we're all much more the same than different.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's definitely my experience in many of the countries I've been into and lived in. And I think another point that you touched on, which is, yeah, is very interesting, is how, and I will never understand this for the life of me. I know so many people who I've grown up with, people I know in you know, just met over the years, who've just never been anywhere. Like, and everyone has their idea of happiness and stuff like that, and I understand that. But, you know, it's like you said, some people's idea of holiday is 2 weeks on the beach, which to me, that's, you need to see culture. You need to see something different. You know, I remember going on holiday years ago, and I'm not going to name names, but they know who they are. So if they are listening, sorry, but hey, this was 7 years ago. I was holidaying in Bulgaria, and it was like a sort of couple, almost like a couple's deal. I was dating this girl, and she had a couple of friends who wanted to come as well, and we did this whole thing, and it was cool, you know, initially. And the thing is, it was a beach holiday, which I wasn't really into at all. I'd never done it before, so in that sense, I was kind of up for it. But yeah, I just, you know what I mean? Like 2 weeks on a beach, like, what are you going to do? Like,
after a day, it's like, yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, exactly. And the main reason I wanted to go is because, hey, oh my God, it's Bulgaria. It's a different country. I've never been here before. Oh my God. And it was exactly how I thought it would be. Like the first day or two was nice. You know, like we had one of those deals where it's like, you know, like all expenses paid or something, like, so you go crazy at the bar, and yeah. But yeah, that got very old very quickly. And then I was like, what now? Like, we can't just do this every day. Like, we need to explore. And like the strip that they had was obviously built specifically for party tourists, and you know, it's all just clubs, places to get drunk, and that's it. And obviously loads of places to eat. And I was like, oh, there must be something. Like, come on, anything. And my ex as well was like me. She was like, where do we go? What do we do? Like, we got to do something. Luckily, on the third or fourth day, we found that there was like an island you could go to on a boat that was maybe 25-minute sail away. Is that what you say? I don't know. Ride away by boat. So great. We get to go on a boat. It's a sunny day. And we got to go to this remote island. And that's when we saw the culture, like really old ruins, little itsy bitsy shops with weird memorabilia from like World War and all that. And I was like, yes, this is what I wanted. And that 1 day or 2 days we were there, as far as I'm concerned, was the best time out of the whole 2 weeks. Because the rest of the holiday was just, the beach stuff. But I was just content that I'd done that, and that you know what I mean. And from that moment onwards, I realized that, all my holidays or explorations in any country, I need to do that culture stuff. And bringing it back to my point, I will never understand people that only want to stay in their own country or their own place. It's because I think that it's very worth exploring the country you live in. That's very important. That's something that I'm trying to do. Like, and one of the reasons I came back was because I really want to get to know more of my own country and, the nation itself. Because there's a lot that your own nation has to offer, and every place is different. Like in the States, every state is different. Same in the UK, we've got different countries within this nation. But that's the thing, like, they are going to be similar in some extent. Whereas if you go, like somewhere like Bolivia or Peru or France, Germany, whatever, like that's going to be totally different. And I feel that it's worth it for so many different reasons. Like, it just gives you a different sense of perspective. It gives you different experiences. You meet different people. You see how other people live, and you learn, and I think you become more interesting as a person. You get more stories. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's only so much you can talk about in the little town that you live in. Like, do you know what I mean? If I'd have stayed in my hometown, I mean, I liked growing up there, but I couldn't imagine living there my whole life and never going anywhere. That blows my mind.
Yeah, it's sort of dumbfounding to me. But the other thing in travel, I think you also learn about yourself, and you become more resourceful, more confident. You have to conquer fear. I'd go on these trips by myself, and as a plane would sort of descend into wherever that, and I'd be gripped by like, oh, why am I doing this? I'm going to be alone. I'm doing this, and then I had no choice at that point. I'm there, to sally forth and go, of course have a good time. But you learn to conquer that sort of fear of doing things different that you don't know, and the fear of the unknown, and being resourceful. Going to figure out a bus timetable or whatever it is, or the money, and all these things. So I think you actually grow as a person, just personal growth that really is really good for that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm sure our listeners will love listening to that. And for me, I totally get exactly where you're coming from on all of this. Feel exactly the same way. Let's talk about your works as a writer. You're an award-winning author, and you've written a series of works including novellas such as Angels Lost, a series of anthologies in crime, psychological horror, and many other genres, together with your more recent work, Skin of Tattoos, a crime noir thriller. Talk to us about your process of writing these books and how you draw inspiration from your real life experiences in order to craft these stories.
Yeah, some of them, it's difficult where you say inspiration comes from. As a journalist, I came across many different things. So Skin of Tattoos actually came out of something that I interviewed gang members in El Salvador about. And I had this idea for a sort of a bigger story about it. They were actually deported. They were gang members in Los Angeles, and they had been deported because of the crimes they had committed. Oh, wow. And back to El Salvador. The problem was they had been born in El Salvador, but they didn't know, they'd never grown up there. Some of them barely spoke Spanish. Wow. So they were sort of fish out of water in these places where they lived with maybe extended family, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, that they really didn't know, and they didn't know the country at all. They were, they were American. And so it just struck me. So that's actually what that is, a funny sort of paradox of immigration, And so I ended up writing that novel. It's a noir novel about a gang member trying to go straight and how difficult it is. And after I came to LA, and I did cover a lot of gang issues here for the Associated Press, I started writing that. So that's where that came out of, directly sort of out of that journalistic, it was a magazine story I did. My other novel, Girl on the Brink, came out of a personal experience, which is an abusive relationship. And I wanted to write something that for younger girls, teenage girls, as they start their dating lives, because nobody teaches you this stuff. There are definite red flags of abusers, and you can mistake them very easily. For example, someone who, calls you incessantly or texts you, it can, oh, I just want to hear your voice. Oh, I just, I can't bear another 10 minutes without, And so this can seem very flattering at first. But really what they're doing is controlling. They're checking up on you. They're not giving you time to live your life or what have you. So that's what I wrote a book about that. It's a young adult novel, Girl on the Brink. So that came out of a personal experience. Right now I'm working on a mystery that came out of a location that from high school in New Jersey where I went, which was a rock up in the mountains, and there was a lake and a big rock, and kids would go up there to party and smoke pot and drink beer and whatnot. So I have a mystery centered around this. Again, it just always stuck to me, this mysterious, it could be a very sinister setting in some cases. So yeah, it's a different amalgam of different things that you come across. And I have a book, and I write down different ideas that I have, and different thoughts, sometimes names, like place names or names that I think would be good for a character, and I just write them all down. And when I need something, I go to my notebook.
I've often heard certain writers in various different fields say that, the best stories come from real life, from, things you've experienced, or just, maybe like things that you take inspiration from, and then you craft that into the novel. Like, for instance, I know the comedian Ricky Gervais, like whenever he does a TV show, he always does it around something that, he's personally experienced. Obviously, many people know him for The Office. And, with that was literally a boss or someone he'd worked with that he based his main character on, and the setting of working in that office and everything. And I think as far as like the relatability aspect of it, that's what makes these sort of stories much better and much more engaging, because it's stuff that people can relate to, and you can kind of tell and feel that it comes from maybe sort of a realer place, because you know what I mean, because like if it's too much of a also like an abstract story or something, it's like maybe it's more difficult to lose yourself in it. And whereas if it's more real, or it doesn't have to necessarily be real, but like if it has a concrete point, then it's like, something people can really engage with.
Yeah, it has to be relatable in some way. And usually, I mean, even in fantasy or science fiction or whatever, you have characters, and you have to be able to empathize with the characters and what they're going through, even though it may be a, fantasy setting or what have you, with werewolves and God knows, goblins or what have you. But you can relate to the actions and the mentality of the character, emotions of the characters.
When you were talking about Girl on the Brink, you mentioned obviously the reasons for doing this is to inspire young women and to give them confidence and sort of teach them and stuff. And one of the things that I noticed, which we covered in the preamble, is that you're a public speaker. And I wanted to know what sort of things that you speak about when you're doing your public speaking. Like, I can kind of sort of reason the sort of things that you tend to speak about based on logic and what we've spoken about. But I'd just like to know, like, what kind of things you speak about. Like, I presume that you obviously do public speaking with younger women and to educate in that sort of medium. But is there any other particular topics that you discuss with people?
I do. Well, I speak a lot about writing and books, to book clubs, writing groups, that sort of thing, libraries. So that's one topic, and all kinds of different aspects of that. And then I do speak about dating relationships, dating abuse, I suppose, domestic violence. That's another topic. And then I have spoken about my journalistic career and, the adventures I've been on, and travel, that sort of thing, and how I grew up and travel. So those are the three main things, I think.
What do you think it takes to become, say a really good public speaker? Like, what are the main qualities do you think you need?
I was painfully shy as a kid. I really was. And I think that's partly, genetic, I suppose, but also because I moved around so a lot. I was always the new kid on the block. So I was just very shy. I would, watch what people were doing so I could fit in, but fitting in was the main thing. When you're a kid, you want to fit in and belong somewhere. So, and as a journalist, I had to push through that, because you have to, go up to complete strangers, ask questions and things like that. So, if I can do it, anybody can, I think. And you just have to push yourself. And I practice, I think, is a good way, you know, in front of a mirror or just speaking to small groups before going to larger groups. I think that really helped me as well. And also having an outline of what to say and again, practicing it. Some people, you know, sort of speak extemporaneously. I found that that didn't work for me because then I would forget something and then have to go back and then it would just look, you know, it would look sort of disorganized. So I think having at least either an outline and things and speaking, and then trying to inject some humor. You know, audiences love humor. And so that if you can make things funny, people actually, they want to laugh and, you know, they do laugh at my jokes if I, you know, not a comedian or anything, but, you know, if you can inject that little bit of humor, even, you know, dry, if it's a corporate talk or something, or serious, like, you know, dating abuse or whatever. That really goes over well. Really goes over well. But I think also you just have to be yourself, and that's what audiences want to see. That you kind of have to relax, which can be difficult. You know, you're up there with all these eyes staring at you. But the more you can relax and be yourself and let your personality show through, I think that people respond to that.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll add on top of that. I think it does take a great deal of practice. Like these things don't kind of just come overnight. Like I am a bit of a omnivore. That's generally how I describe myself. So, you know, I find it pretty easy to like do that in those social situations, but I almost always have to force myself to do it because most of the time I'm very kind of content with just walking around the room, observing, drinking, you know, that's I like that. And obviously you don't achieve anything really, but I mean it's nice to enjoy, you know, but you don't really achieve anything. Like if you're at a networking event you need to talk to people, so it's yeah, I suppose it's important to sort of push through that boundary or whatever and put yourself out there. And yeah, I think it gets easier over time, doesn't it? The more you practice your speech.
Right. The more you do it, you know, as I said, you're starting with small, like little writing groups. That, you know, that was a really good thing that built my confidence, you know, and I thought, well, I can do this, you know, and you know, I can make people laugh or people liked me and, you know, they came and bought my book and I was like, okay, I can do this, you know, and I just, you know, again, I have to push myself too, because I'm exactly the same way. I'm like, oh, a cocktail party, you know, but, you know, some people it comes more naturally than others, but yeah.
Do you, I'm intrigued because obviously, as you said, you've taught yourself to not be shy and to overcome it and stuff, but I imagine it's something that doesn't ever quite go away. And like for me, I've always been great at talking to people. I've never really been shy about that. But as I've gotten older, I have become much more introverted, which is why I say I'm an omnivore. And what I mean by that is, and I've said this to people, and it always sounds a bit crazy, but every kind of circumstance is different for me. So like sometimes I'll walk in a room. Like here's a really good example. So I volunteer at this place here in Manchester, and we had like I suppose like a Christmas do. It was like socially distanced and stuff. But what I recall about it was that I was basically the structure of this place is that you enter the building from the downstairs, you walk up the stairs, and there's a main area, right? Now, normally that's just a couple of tables, whatever, and it's empty, right? But I walk in and there's like 40 people, 50 people spaced out, but like around this room. And I'm like, and I sort of, as I walked behind trying to like, you know, not be, because it always happens. You enter a room, everyone stares at you and there's nothing to think about because no one cares. Everyone does the same thing. Like I guarantee when you sit down, you'll be the person staring at people again. So it's, you got to like remove the, oh my God, they're staring at me thing because no one cares. But yeah, for that minute, everyone has their eyes on you. And I remember walking to the side of the room and just whispering to someone like, oh, there's a lot of people here. And my point is that most of the time I don't mind, but sometimes you get those instances where, yeah, suddenly you feel really shy. And I just wonder, like, do you have like instances of that where like one situation you're just confident and at ease, and in another time it's suddenly like almost like you're paralyzed with fear? Like, do you experience that in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it's just a mood or some or you just, it's some sort of vibe you pick up on or something. But sometimes I feel more forward and sometimes I just don't feel forward. I just feel like, oh, I'll just sit here, take the easy way out. Or sometimes I'm like, the life of the party, going around and more animated. I will say, one time I showed up for, it was a writing group thing, and it was in Orange County, which is south of LA, and LA traffic is just horrendous. And so it took me, I arrived just on time after bashing through this freeway traffic, and I was just like frazzled and exhausted and worried that I was going to be late. And so I rushed in, set up, and just went into my thing, and I was very flat. I really was, and I could see everybody was just sort of like looking at me, and I just I just didn't have it together. And so, it went okay, but, then nobody bought my book, and I couldn't really, and then afterward, I was just like, I learned a lesson here. I have to allow time to, even if I get somewhere an hour early or 2 hours early, just to get there and relax, and not be so because I was so frazzled after the traffic and whatnot. So, things like that can influence you too, your mood. If you're really out of it, stressed out to get to the event, even if it's a party or something, it takes a while for me to wind down, things like that. So yeah, you learn, but yeah, I absolutely, there are days when I feel like, I'm the leader, everybody's going to follow me. And other days I feel like, I'll just, sit here.
Oh, it really is like that, isn't it? Moving things forward, talk to us a little bit about your work as an editor. I noticed that you've done a lot of news editing, and I think our listeners would probably like to know a little bit more about that and what that involves, and just the job in general.
Yeah, I became I was a journalist, and
Right.
I started my career at newspapers in New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, and so there I was a reporter, and then I became a copy editor and what they call an assigning editor, where you sort of assign reporters to go out and report on stories.
Okay.
So I found it really, when I went back to writing as a reporter, but it's not as fun as reporting when you're out there in the field, because you're sitting at a desk, literally, 8 hours of just staring at a computer screen. So I went back eventually to writing and reporting, but my writing was a lot better after having been an editor. And then I saw, because you sort of write in a vacuum. You think everybody works and writes like you, and then you see all these different styles and mistakes people make and whatnot as an editor. So I think it actually improved my writing quite a bit. And now I do a lot of editing. I work as a freelance editor and writer. I probably do more writing than editing. Well, I don't know, 50-50 perhaps. But again, I edit self-publish, people are self-publishing novels or what have you. So I edit their manuscripts, or I edit a lot of reports and or rewrite different corporate things. So again, it's fun, but it's pretty taxing work too when you sit down and edit, because it's about structure and organizing words and sentences. So at the end of an edit, I'm actually more tired than if I was doing it's just writing. So it is, but you develop, and again, the more you do it, you develop an eye for looking for details too.
I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah, I'm a freelance writer as well, in predominantly in the field of marketing, and I must say, proofing and editing is so much more taxing and tiring than just writing an article. And writing an article, for the most part, is easy because, as you say, you have your own style, and as long as the client gives you kind of something to work with, okay, in marketing, it's here's the topic, here's the keywords, go, and I can normally just turn that into something quite easily. But yeah, when they either don't give you a lot to work on, or I've had situations where I was literally doing, I remember this one client, I was sort of editing and proofing their website, and oh my God, was that boring. It's got to be done, and it's you got to take pride in everything you do and always give it your utmost 100%, but it's very tiring. And I think the main thing that makes it tiring is that your mind has to be really fixated on the words, and
really focus.
That's the thing, our brains do this thing where we skip over words.
Mm-hmm.
So like sometimes I even have proofread my own work and there'll be mistakes still afterwards. And it's very frustrating because I'm like, God damn it. Like I'm so careful with this, but like there's still something that, and normally it's something very minor, like it, maybe you missed a connecting word or, you know, just something very minor, but still like when you pride yourself on your work, and particularly if you're freelance and you're trying to build a brand where you're trying to say, hey, take my services, like I'm the best, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like you got to prove that. And it's like little minor things like that, they kind of destroy your reputation a little bit, like, you know, maybe that's a bit of a crazy way of putting it, but you know, I think it is important.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I miss words all the time, and I'm writing like the or an or these, you know, and I can read it like 3 times and I miss it every time. My brain, it just skips over. And then somebody else will read it and catch it right away. I'm like, I read that, you know, like 5 times. I never caught the missing the. You know, it's weird, but yeah.
It's just mad as well, because you see it in all, I've seen it in all sorts of publications, like not just articles. I've seen it on like official, you know, documents from major companies. I've seen it in books, like proper books, you know, but by very famous authors as well. Like this happens all the time, and I think it's a combination of 2 things. It's a combination of what we just laid out, and also the reader doing the same thing. I think you don't often pick up on the words unless you're kind of sort of in autopilot and you're kind of like relaxed, or if you are looking for those mistakes, obviously, then you're more likely to find it. But it's it's just crazy how the mind works sometimes.
I know. But it just is, again, it's also how focused you have to be when you're editing and proofing.
Yeah.
That sort of work. You just have to really be so on every detail, every word, every apostrophe, you know. That's how taxing it does get.
What are your main sort of goals and aspirations for writing? Is there like, I don't know, maybe some particular awards you'd be interested in winning, or I don't know, is there like a target as far as like sales, or maybe it's more creative? Do you have like a goal where it's like, I want to write this kind of book or this kind of thing, or like what is your what would be like the pinnacle of your like sort of writing career, so to speak?
It would be great to be able to live off my income off my books. And so
Right.
I wouldn't have to do proofing and editing and freelance writing. That is quite a tall order. Many, you know, there are a few novelists that live off their novels. You know, most have to do other things, you know, either teach or do freelancing or what have you. But I'd love to be a bestseller, or, you know, win some prize that would, you know, a known prize that would sort of put me on the literary map, that type of thing. So it's, you know, you just have to keep slogging at it. And, you know, basically you have to do it as a labor of love, because you just don't make that much money out of it or anything. And they're huge projects to write a book. It just takes a lot of, you know, you really don't get the recompense for it. So you have to do it because you're driven to do it. Sometimes I think I'm a masochist, but, you know, I just love to do it. So that's really what I want to keep doing.
I'm exactly in the same boat as you, in a different way, but obviously I'm trying to make my podcast and YouTube my living, and as many content creators listening will know, and podcasters as well, like it's that sort of thing where, you know, it doesn't happen overnight, and many people start it and then give up, you know, very early on, maybe even like 6 months into it, and you got to do this stuff for years. You've got to build this for many years. And I often think about that, because obviously my freelance work is essentially what keeps me going. And, you know, I like writing, but what you're writing and what you're writing for is everything. Like I would much rather be writing articles on, I don't know, but probably more creative writing, because that's something I've not really done. I do poetry, but creative writing is something that's like kind of eluded me as far as, you know, writing is concerned. But I'm much more interested in, you know, creating video content, podcasting, like these kind of mediums, like just talking. I really enjoy that, and it's difficult to build that over time. And as you say, you need these little kind of things to help you do your main thing. But like you said, like it's essential that you love what you do. And I think that it serves as the means, or it will serve as the catalyst to make it happen for you as well. Like I kind of believe in myself that I can do this. And, I think like with yourself, like as you continue over the years, like inevitably it will happen. Do you know what I mean? I think it's like I said, like when I came across your website, like I was fascinated by the story. And I think we as humans are just fascinated by stories. It's probably like the most entertaining thing, one of the most entertaining things in life. It's not so much like, people can talk all day about like, oh, I earned this much and I did this thing. And it's like, but stories are everything. And not just what the story is, but the way you tell it as well. That's something that I've had to learn over the years. Like it's very easy to just be like, yeah, this happened and this happened. But like, as you say, sometimes it can fall flat if you're not prepared and you don't have like your own way of kind of telling the story, being a storyteller.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, people are fascinated by people. And that's why, the gossip, industry is huge, because people want to read about people, what they're doing, I mean, really, who cares what, Prince Harry and Meghan are doing, but, big headlines.
See, that's one thing I'll never understand though. Like okay, I would be interested in learning about, like for instance, one of my favorite people is Patrick Stewart. I think he's an excellent actor. I would love to learn more about him as a person, right? But I don't want to know about, him and his wife are having issues and blah, blah. Like, who cares? Like, why is that interesting?
Really, it doesn't matter to anybody's life. It really doesn't make a difference, but people are fascinated by
Yeah,
it.
like entire magazine. We've got so many of them in the UK. And I've never read them because, but like sometimes I look at them and I'm like, these sell very well. Like there's a market for this. Why is there a market for this? But I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think people are fascinated by people and people's stories, and I think everybody has a story to tell. Some people are more interesting than others, but I think everybody, in when it comes down to it, has a story. And that was one thing I loved as a journalist, was getting to interview people and finding out their stories. And as a journalist, you can ask people sort of personal questions, about how old they are, and what influence did your father have on you, or your mother?
Yeah.
You can ask these sort of personal questions, and people loved it. And again, people's favorite subject is themselves ultimately. I say, as I'm talking about myself. But it is, yeah. So I think stories is a huge thing. Just going back to caveman days. They would sit around the fire telling stories with the paintings on the rock wall.
One thing that's interested me over the years is how, because sometimes, a lot of the time, people are just interested in listening to me talk, and I'll be honest, I prefer listening to talking. If anything, I kind of live by that saying of, like you don't learn anything by talking, so just shut up and listen, But inevitably you do have to talk and you have to tell stories, and that's kind of more what I use YouTube for. So in real life, I'm just listening. That's what I'm doing. But on this, I talk all I want, right? It makes sense to do it in that way. But like I look at like the way that people sort of interact with each other, and I wonder like why people sometimes say to me, oh, you love talking about yourself, don't you? And I think, to be honest with you, we all use ourselves, like not just to talk about ourselves, but as a reference point. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're trying to relate to someone, 9 times out of 10 you're going to say, well, when I was in similar situation, or when I was in this instance, I don't. For example, people have mocked me for talking about living in Estonia, right? And for me, that's something recent that happened in my life. It's a big part of my life. Obviously, I'm very proud of that and everything. But a lot of the time, I don't actually bring it up on purpose. It's more of a case of like, if someone says something about, let's say we're talking about Europe, I don't know, politics, I'll say, oh yeah, when I was in Estonia, it was X, Y, and Z. So it's more kind of like relatability rather than me going, oh, hey, listen to me talk about X, Y, and Z for half an hour. Like I'm not like that. But it's interesting to me that people have that attitude. And I think it comes down to a combination of maybe jealousy, but also kind of people failing to understand like human interaction. Like you have to have that baseline point of relatability. And often that will be coming from your own experiences. You know what I mean? Like, it's, unless I guess you're talking about someone you know closely and sort of talking about their experiences, but you know what I mean? Like, makes more sense to talk about your own experiences, because you can also talk about how you felt in those instances as well, which is something also that people want to know. It's, people always say like, well, you know, yeah, you did this thing, but how did it feel being in that instance? And what was that like? And, you know, it's interesting.
Yeah, it can be difficult. You know, this is one thing I've never talked about my background, even how I grew up or traveling or what have you, a lot, because people come, you know, it can come across as boasting, and people think that, you know, and I get accused of being a snob too, because you know, I say some word differently. You know,
Oh,
it
wow.
sounds to Americans, it sounds, you know, Britishy or something, and it just sounds, because I say bean instead of bin, or you know, whatever, you know. So people pick up on these little things, and it makes me like, ooh, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. You know, maybe I shouldn't even talk at all. You know,
No.
and it does. You know, it is a bit inhibiting. So, you know, going onto a podcast, I can actually, you know, talk all I want about all these things. But yeah, it is, and it is a combination, I think, of envy, and people just can't relate to it. You know, they don't. It always amazes me because people don't want to find out how it was to live in Venezuela or Guatemala or something, or Estonia, and you know, they just kind of look, oh, and sort of turn and change the subject to some, you know,
Yeah. I never
inane, you
get
know,
that.
innocuous subject. But yeah, so there is that aspect of it. But I do think in general we live in an age, you know, with the social media and everything, where self-promotion is much more permissible than it used to be.
It's true.
You know, it used to be you would never, you know, say too much about yourself or put yourself forward. You know, it was just seen as unseemly. But now you're, you know, and that was something I had to come, you know, get over too. Like, you posting about myself on Facebook or what have you. It's, you know, we do live in a bit more of a narcissistic age, where it's okay to say, I won this prize, or I'm doing this, and you know.
See, that's the thing. I think it's silly that there is that attitude, because what we're doing, like for instance, both of us, what we're doing is marketing. It's branding. That's what it is. And marketing and branding has been around for hundreds of years, you know, maybe even longer than that. And that's how you get things across if you're selling products, services. So it's no different. Like, the only thing is, in order to get people interested in, and, you know, for instance, if I want people to subscribe to my channel or check out this podcast, I have to make the content entertaining, but I also have to think about, you know, how I promote that, and saying like, hey, would you be interested in this? Make sure you check this out because this happened. You know, like, I don't see that as boasting and stuff. I think I see it as like, it makes sense to do that. It's essential to do that. I think in everyday life, obviously, there is a way to approach these things. So, you know, I mean, if I often wait for people to ask me, I don't bring it up, the things that I do, unless I see a fair opportunity to do so, and it feels like sort of normal to do so, like, you know, not too imposing. Or yeah, if they ask me, and often, you know, as the case is, when people ask you and probe you, then they want to know more and more and more. So it surprises me, for instance, that you say like you've had these instances where you're like, yeah, I lived in Venezuela, and people don't want to know more. Like, that is confusing to me, because humans are naturally inquisitive. So you'd think you'd want to
No,
know.
yeah, they just sort of like, oh, they can't relate to it. Maybe they don't know what
Right.
Venezuela is, or it's just something so foreign to their. Why would you do that? You know, they think I'm some sort of odd person or something. I don't know, but it does. You know, there is that as well. So it's, you know, it can be a mixed bag. But yeah, as you say, when you can sort of detect too when people are interested, when, you know, people have traveled a lot more, or
Yes.
have a broader mind, then they're more open to that. You know, sometimes when people you know, have lived in one town their whole life, they're not, you know, probably going to really appreciate someone's other, you know, overseas experiences as much.
I think the key comes down to open-mindedness, really, because you don't have to travel the world to have an open mind, but it helps.
No,
You know, because they say like
right.
travel broadens the mind, but I've met many people that haven't traveled a lot but still have the most open minds of all time. And I think it's, you know, that's certainly how I live my life, is sort of the quest for knowledge, the quest to learn more. Like, I will never understand people that don't want to learn, don't want to understand, but hey, you know, whatever, like,
Yeah,
as
it
long as
takes
you're
all
happy.
types. Like I said, it takes all types to
Okay, moving it forward. One thing I want to do before I kind of just go in on this, asking you about your foreign correspondence stuff, because there's so much to delve into there. I want to circle back to talking about the work that you've done motivating the teenage girls, because I want to know, like, is there any kind of like success stories you've had as a result of that, where maybe people have reached out back to you, maybe through emails, or maybe when you were doing the talks, did people ever kind of confide in you, and you were able to kind of move them forward with their life, and yeah, were there any success stories in that area?
Well, every time I talk about this book to a group
Yeah,
and mention it was based on my own experience, and it was inspired more than based. But anyway, anytime I mention this, afterward, I always get someone, usually a woman, or more than one, coming up to me and saying, that happened to me too. I was in an
yeah,
abusive marriage for 14 years. It took me 20 years to get out. And I've had women come up to me crying and tears in their eyes and just saying, I'm so glad you're doing this. And this was my experience, and it never fails. And every time I speak about it. So I hope it has moved the needle forward. I do get actually a lot of women or older women even buying it for granddaughters, daughters, nieces, for teenagers in their lives to read it. So hopefully it's done some good at some level. I know it does resonate with readers. I do
hmm
know that, and I hope it's certainly put that more on the map. And especially, and it can also happen to boys, but it does happen more to girls.
yeah.
Or the warning signs of an abuser, because they can be very misleading, especially nobody teaches you this stuff. You just kind of just land in it, and often too late.
I think it's excellent, the work that you're doing, and it's really, it's really good to hear, really reassuring to hear that like there have been people that have resonated with it and been able to find some sort of positivity in that, because it's not something easy to get through, and it does take a long time, and
Speaking of branding and promoting,
yeah, go for it, please. Yes, there
and in
you
fact,
go.
it's going to come out. A friend of mine actually just translated it into Spanish. He's
Oh, cool.
a native of Peru, so we're working on that, and that's going to be released in Spanish shortly. So that's going to be another adventure: how to market a book in Spanish. I have not done that before, but anyway. So there's Girl on the Brink.
So make sure you go out and purchase that book. Where can they get that book? So obviously on your website, but where else can they
Yeah,
find
it's
that
on my
book?
website. I've got I actually ordered a bunch of copies. I had a whole bunch of book events, scheduled for last year, and that all went with the thanks to the coronavirus. So so you can buy a signed copy. Just send me an email on my website. It's on Amazon.
Excellent.
So and it's on Amazon UK and Australia. Amazon puts it on all the Amazons worldwide. So.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, make sure you go out and purchase that book, and all the other books that because Christina's done a lot of books. There's a lot of stuff on there, and all different genres, like I covered earlier. So lots to take away there and to delve into. Now let's move it forward. You have interviewed gang members, bank thieves, thugs, billionaires, even presidents. What are some of the interviews that stick out most for you, and why?
Some of the more interesting things are the people who are sort of on the margins of society, like, like the gang members in El Salvador. It was just sort of interesting. I was out on, sort of in this shanty town on the outskirts of San Salvador, and I was interviewing sort of what they call a shot caller, which is a leader of a little band, a little crew of, young teenagers. So there was a dirt road leading into the shanty town, and they had strung up a chain across the road. So anytime anybody was coming in, they had to stop at the chain across the road, and the kids would come down and demand a tax, or a toll. Basically, it was like a toll they had to pay, and they would lift up the chain and the car would go through. And this was how they made their money. It was just this outright sort of extortion type of thing. So I was interviewing the guy on the sidelines ordering these kids around, and he leans into me. He's like, "Senora, can you get me a job? I have a girlfriend and I have a baby, 6 months, and I just really need a job." And I thought to myself, so here's this gang member, and it was just struck me again how similar everybody is. He really just wanted a job, and of course, not a lot of employment in El Salvador. But that's what he wanted, was just a job to support his kid and his girlfriend. And there he was reduced to, this haphazard thing of putting a chain across the road and, totally charging this illegal sort of thing. So that was pretty, it was pretty crazy. And it just, let's see, I've had a lot of other wild experiences. I went into a jail in Caracas one time. I was doing a story on prison conditions for a human rights magazine, and there was this one jail that was, the worst of the worst, and I applied for permission to go in and see and the prison official said, no, we could not guarantee your safety. So of course I was like, now I really want to go in and see what's going on there. So a reporter friend of mine knew a nun who went in on a regular basis to minister to the inmates and what have you, and she was actually from the Philippines. So I called her up and she said, yeah, I can take you in. And I said, well, do I have to dress in a habit? She's like, oh no, I just wear a t-shirt and jeans. I'm like, oh, okay, good. So we go and, on a Saturday morning, line up, and huge line, and, with all, the women were separated from the men. And she's like, well, there's something you need to know. And I said, what? And she's like, well, there's a vaginal search for all the women going in. I'm like,
say what?
Holy shit. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, I wanted to get in there, and I thought, well, if this nun could do that, I was going to do it. So we get there, we line up in the women's line, and it was full of like prostitutes and everything, because these prostitutes would go into the jail.
Okay.
And there's this little hut up there, a little sort of shack, and so the line goes forward. The nun goes first, and then so I go in, and there's this, prison guard, and she's got a gloved hand, and she tells me to lie down on the table, so I do, and then she says, well, just unzip your jeans, unbutton and unzip your jeans. So I just do that, and I'm thinking, And then she just patted inside on my abdomen. She said, that's it. And I said,
oh, okay.
No. I said, no, other search. And she said, no, we just got rid of that last week. We got a lot of complaints about it. And I was like,
oh my God.
I was like, well, I really lucked out. I didn't know what I was going to do, but it was funny because I didn't know that going in. I was fully prepared for this completely invasive, search, but apparently women visitors had really complained about it. And
did you find out why? Because I would presume that rule is in play, or was in place, in order, maybe women trying to smuggle things in that way.
Exactly.
I presume.
Drugs, yeah.
Right.
I would assume, or I guess it could be other things, but I would assume drugs. And then when we got inside, it was this horrific stench. I mean, it was like broken sewage, like raw sewage stench. It was just awful. And, the prisoners were in there just dressed in sort of shorts, and sometimes not even shirts, just sort of boxer shorts and flip-flops. And I mean, it was just awful. And, I had to say I was a nun, and then two of them wanted me to go down and see, we have something to show you down here. And I said, okay. So I go down with them to this basement, and there was a broken water pipe, and all this black water was, wastewater was just flowing out, freely, it wasn't being repaired. And I was like, wow, that is bad. They wanted to show me that. And then all of a sudden I see one of them had this long metal, piece of metal stick, down the back of his jeans. And I said, oh, what's that? And he brings it out, and he's like, oh, this was a bed leg, but, I sharpened it, and it had been sharpened to a point. This is my weapon. And I'm like, oh. And then all of a sudden it hit me. I'm like down in this basement where I was alone with these two guys, and I'm like, what am I doing? Get out of there. So I was just like, well, I think we should go back upstairs and join, Sister so-and-so. So we went upstairs, but I was just like, sometimes wow. I've been like too fearless, I think.
Yeah.
Nothing happened, but I was like, God, if something had happened, nobody would have heard me. And I even if it had, nobody would have come, It's just crazy.
What did you learn from that specific experience? Because obviously you said you went in there for a purpose. So like other than what you've just sort of laid out, was there any maybe like some interviews that you conducted there, or like was there anything you were able to sort of gather there for a story or something like that?
Yeah, that's what the story basically was, just on the really inhumane conditions of
Right.
those
Okay. Okay.
places. So I did gather a lot of stuff, and by the end of the visit, we went and upstairs, and then there was no visiting hall. Usually in a prison, there's like a visiting place with tables, and people go in and visit. And so it was in the cells. So we go into the cells, and that's where all the family members were running in and out, and there were buckets of water. There was no like running water, so the inmates would fill up these buckets of water. It was just, again, pretty primitive. And I'm asking a lot of questions about the water situation, and this guy looks at me, he's like, "You wouldn't be a journalist, would you? You're asking a lot of questions." I'm like, "Shit." I said, no, I'm just, a nun. I just just interested in conditions here so I can take this back to, tell everybody
The
about it." And I was like,
sisterhood.
yeah, and I was just like, so then I was like, told the real nun, I said, "You know what? I think I've got enough for today."
Yeah.
I was like, God, they did not want outsiders, I guess, knowing about their whatever it was, drug deals and
Right. Okay.
businesses they had in there, because there were no guards anywhere inside the prison. Then I understood why they said we cannot guarantee your safety. The guards actually sat sort of on the perimeter of the prison in a little office. They weren't inside the jail at all. It
So
was really odd.
were the prisoners freely walking around
Yeah,
then?
they were just walking around everywhere. It was controlled by and then they had these prison gangs and warfare and drugs and whatever they did in there. Sort of, they controlled the prison, basically. So they did not want this revealed, I guess. But anyway, so that was probably the most harrowing reporting I've ever done.
Do you think that the guards feasibly then were afraid of the prisoners then? So that sort of situation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. They just said, "Man, who cares? I'm not going to risk my life to go in there." And they just didn't have control of the place.
Wow, inmates run the asylums, crazy. Yeah, one other random thing I just wanted to ask on that particular story. Did you see like the food that they were eating or anything like that, like those sorts of?
Oh, but we went into the cafeteria and I saw the kitchen, and it was filthy. It just had this layer of black grease, and it was all sort of cement. So they were sort of like cement tables and benches, fixed in the place.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
just like this layer, like, good quarter of an inch at least, thick of grease. I mean, it was just disgusting. It was just really, really disgusting.
So when you broke this story, like what was the aftermath? Did it lead to any changes perhaps, or?
I don't know. I mean, I know that particular jail was demolished. Maybe 6 months later, the government decided they moved the prisoners out to other prisons, and
That's
they just
something.
blew up the thing. Yeah, they just exploded this. The conditions were just horrific.
Right. Yeah, obviously I asked, that you interviewed lots of different types of people. Tell us some stories about some of the billionaires and presidents you've interviewed. Like, did you learn anything maybe you shouldn't have, or was there any weird interactions as far as that was concerned? Like, what did you learn from those experiences?
Well, I interviewed President Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. I ended up interviewing him twice for Time magazine, and what was apparent was he just talks nonstop. So it's really, and you ask him a question and he'll just go on, expounds. And he was a very educated man, actually, but he just loved to talk. But what was sort of interesting is he's had a great personal charisma, and you could see how he got so many people to follow him. And he had actually led a failed coup 10 years in 1992. And you can just see how people would have followed him. I mean, he was just you felt like just drawn into him, and like, yeah, go Hugo, It was just a really incredibly different type of personality, just his personal charisma, and he could really control like a room or you just felt like he was drawing you in. It was just sort of a really interesting experience. I've never met anyone like that. then billionaires, I've interviewed two Venezuelan billionaires, Gustavo Cisneros and Lorenzo Mendoza, and both of them were highly controlled. They were, they had their PR person, had to check me out, had to check out the publication, what this was for, we're going to talk about this. So it was all very, controlled.
So they vetted your questions, like you were only allowed to ask certain questions.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to ask this or that, and they wouldn't go too far into political talk or anything. It was very controlled, so it was just sort of, just totally different type of interview. But again, those people kind of tend to protect their reputations, quite a bit. So,
one thing I want to say on that topic, actually, about the charisma, so to speak, is that's something I've noticed about Donald Trump, or at least initially, excuse me, and how he was able to kind of garner such a major following. Because a lot of people are like, why does he have such committed followers? And I think a lot of it comes down to people call him stupid. He's not stupid. He's a good manipulator. He knows how to get to his voters. And it's something we've seen throughout history. You could probably say the same about Adolf Hitler, but like the pattern is always the same, that you look at the problems society is dealing with and you address them, and then you talk about how you're going to change them. So obviously Hitler promised a lot of change in various ways. And to be fair, in the years preceding the war, there was actually a lot of change. Like, he delivered on those promises. So that's how he was able to get such a big following, because he was doing what he was saying. Like, imagine that, a politician doing what they say, right? But with Donald Trump, I feel that it was a very similar thing. But like, obviously his charisma and his ability to do that has kind of come over the years through his business exploits, and more recently through his reality TV stuff. So it's interesting to see that, and obviously to see the aftermath of what that's turned into. Actually, I do want to ask real quick, like, what has been sort of your experience or kind of perspective on that? Obviously, you're in the States right now, so sort of living it to a degree.
Just when you can't think that Donald Trump, you've sort of, you can't think anything else can happen, something else happens. You just don't know what to he just does these completely unpredictable, erratic things. And now we have this, very odd, weird insurrection. People stormed the Capitol building. There was a security police there. They just kind of, again, gave up, and people were wandering around. They were sitting in the House Speaker's desk and stealing the lectern, the podium. And I mean, it was just crazy. And there's just a sense that, how could have this happened? And just the things he did to try and, he lost the election. It was, by all accounts, a fair and square election, but he just tried like hell to whip up this frenzy that the election was stolen from him. He just couldn't get over that he didn't win. And it was just, down to outright, phone call to the Georgia elections.
Yeah.
Asking, can you find me 11,000 more votes? I just need 11,000 more votes. I mean, just, but he has no shame. That's the other thing. He just doesn't, all this comes out and it just doesn't matter. He just keeps going on and rolling, but he knows exactly what to say to his base. And his base is surprisingly big. 74 million people did vote for him. So, it's, who knows what's going to happen after Joe Biden takes office, if Trump is going to be there as a sort of perennial thorn in the side, or he'll fade off, or who knows, start a new political party or movement. We just don't know, but it's just been really a crazy time.
One thing that amazes me above all else is this tactic that he uses, which I'm sure you've probably noticed in many other people you've interviewed over the years, where he does this thing where he essentially he lies, right? And says like, yeah, we did this. This was the best deal ever, and we did this, and it was tremendous, and all this. And he's basically just saying about how everything that he's done is amazing and it's the best ever, right? But he gets caught out because everything right now in society, there's video evidence for. There's, Yeah, we can get access to everything. We can disprove everything. And we can say, dude, you're a liar. You're lying. And he just continues and continue. And like that blows my mind more than anything else, is that kind of almost disillusionment. Like, I wonder, does he consciously think, oh, I'll just keep lying about this and you know, all this section of society will believe me and that's fine because I just need them to vote? Or is he actually truly delusional and believes those things and is just kind of saying it to, you know, because he genuinely believes it? Because some people are like that in life. Some people genuinely create, like, sometimes people lie so much in life that they get like that they kind of blur the lines between fact and fiction, and then they kind of believe their own lies. It's a really weird.
You know, I think that's the case with him. Because again, it's mind-boggling that he can have the truth. He can lie just outright, bold lies about something, and he'll be confronted with the truth, and he'll say, "Well, that's not true." You did a very good impression of him, by the way. It's just the fake news. It's just the fake news. That's not the whole story. Or he'll come up with some vague, dismissal. And I think he really does believe his lies. I mean, I just think there's something mentally wrong with him, and he's delusional. I think that's the only rational explanation. I just don't see him, because it's just mind-boggling, the continual facade that he has pumped and just constantly. And there are people who go along with it. These bizarre conspiracy theorists, this QAnon thing. I mean, it's just truly bizarre how it's taken root. And again, what this bodes for the future, I don't know.
Here's a thing that you mentioned that I really want to ask you about, because obviously your work as a journalist and a news writer and such. What is your thoughts on this fake news thing that he's created? Because I must say that at first, when it first happened, it was a meme. We all laughed about it, blah, 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 right? But the dangerous thing that he's sort of created as an offshoot of that is there is actually legitimately fake news out there. You find loads of articles posted online that are just nonsense. They're just not factual. And luckily, we do have some websites that are like fact checkers and things. For example, if a photo is photoshopped, it will be listed. I can't remember the exact website, but there's a particular website that does this, where it will say like, oh, this photo that said this is not factual, blah blah blah, disproven, right? But yeah, as a journalist, like, what do you actually think of this fake news thing, and how bad is it really? Is it something we should be concerned about, or is it just kind of like a come and go kind of thing, just a farce that Donald Trump created?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's nothing new. I mean, dating back to the Roman times, kill the messenger. You
Right.
kill the messenger for the bad news, not the thing. But I think it's incredibly dangerous and to democracy. A democracy has to have a free and independent press. And when people don't have trust in the media, it just doesn't bode well, because then either camp, some political nut, can just use that. And that's what he's done. And he's made it very, very divisive, and people not trusting the media. And again, now there's no such thing as sort of a neutral media. You could say the New York Times is ostensibly the American newspaper of record, but now it's been labeled fake news by Donald Trump. So anything that you say, well, it was in the New York Times, fake news.
Yeah.
Well, where do you get news from? Well, there's this website on, and I saw it on Facebook, or, and it's some bizarre random, again, QAnon conspiracy website, and people really think that's the news, and they that's what they trust. And again, incredibly dangerous for going forward if you do not have a public watchdog, because that is one of the essential roles of the media and the press, is to be a public watchdog. So if you're not trusting that public watchdog, it just doesn't bode well for it. It leads to a lot of manipulation now of the public and votes. Again.
We have a free press in the UK, and it's been a sort of a point of controversy for many years because, of this very, fact that, people are able to pretty much post whatever they want. and what the media does here in the UK, it's mainly the tabloids that do this. You don't find broadsheets doing this, but papers like the Sun, the Mail, etc. They'll post anything, and they don't care if it's libel because they'll get sued, and the money that they make on the papers and online and everything vastly outweighs how much they'll ever get sued. So, and they do this on purpose. They do this all the time. And that's because of the way the system is set up. And the sort of, I suppose the point of discussion always is, well, should we have free press, because it enables people to do that, to post infactual news, and then people have infactual information, right? But at the same time, and this is the thing, I'm more on the side of having a free press. Like, while I don't like the idea of papers like the Daily Mail and the Daily Star and such, I do want people to have a choice, because at the end of the day, you can just choose not to read them, choose not to buy them, right? And that's the best way to fight it, I would always say. And I know Ian Hislop in the UK always says the same thing about that. He's the editor of Private Eye, for those who don't know. And that's where I sort of lean on that kind of argument, because I think that, like, when you start sort of telling people what they can and can't do, whether it's online or in newspapers, that's a dangerous road, because where do you draw the line on that? Like, what? it's a very
it's a slippery slope. I agree. I mean, that's the negative side of having a free press is that it can veer the other way, but you need a press that can be critical of the government. That's really what it's meant to be about. That the government, any government, does not have control and can silence the press. But of course, people can, again, take advantage of that to do these gossip rags. But, the thing is with newspapers like the Sun and the Daily Mail, people know what they are. You know what I mean? They know that you read something in there, it's going to be maybe, half and half true, a little factual, misappropriation or what have you. So you kind of expect it from that, and maybe you even read it for that, But then you're going to read the Sunday Times for sort of the, down the road, the real news type of thing, or the Guardian or what have you. So but that is the negative side of that. I mean, one time I did know a friend of mine who worked for the New York Times. He was the Brazil correspondent some years ago when the president was Lula da Silva. Well, Lula da Silva was a well-known alcoholic. He drank. So the Brazilian press never printed this. Larry, his name is Larry, wrote a story, and he included this in. Well, the next thing he knew, he was getting the boot out of Brazil because the government didn't want it was punishment for writing about Lula da Silva's drinking. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing you don't want. I mean, I think the people, deserve to know if their president drinks a lot or whatever, that may affect his judgment on things. But so, those are the kind of things that you can't have a government cracking down on reporters for telling the truth. But on the other hand, they can go completely nuts and on the other side.
This is the thing as well. Like in the UK, we've got a lot of organisations that are quite obviously affiliated with certain political parties. So, I mean, the BBC, for example, British Broadcasting Corporation, is normally just affiliated with whichever party is in power. That's always been quite well known. And to be fair, a lot of the papers either are outwardly in support of a particular party, or it's kind of inferred in the way that the stories are written. You can kind of guess for the most part. And I like that system. I think it's good because it enables people to kind of pick and choose. Like, well, I don't want to support this because it's against my political ideals and stuff. And it's good to have like all these different like there are some papers that are purely just facts. Like I think from what I understand, the Standard, the Times, the Guardian tend to be more kind of down the road, which is what I look for, because the thing is, you can read papers that have political leanings and gain information from it. But the problem is you get too much of a slant, and there's too many words used in there that kind of are derogatory towards one party or whatever. And I suppose you can just like skim through that and see it rise above it. But like it can, for people that are not as maybe strong-willed, strong-minded, it can easily affect them. And that's why, for instance, in the UK we have so many Daily Mail readers or Sun readers, and there's jokes written about it, and it's worrying because in those papers, obviously, they do just write a lot of nonsense and lies about people, parties, whatever, and it's tricky sometimes. But yeah, I think it's better to have that than it is to not have a free press at all and have, as you say, government-owned media. I mean, that just sounds like the worst thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, moving it on. Talk us through your experience of having your laptop searched by Colombian guerrillas. I couldn't believe when I read this, but yeah, please.
Well, there was the Colombian government gave at one point, early 2000s, I guess it was, gave the guerrillas a huge chunk of territory. And this was much criticized and later was rolled back by a later government. But anyway, they gave them a huge chunk of land, a territory in southern Colombia. And basically that was guerrilla. I mean, it was basically like forming a nation within the nation of Colombia that the guerrillas controlled. And so they were having peace talks and whatnot. So for Time Magazine, I went to cover them. So I had to fly. I flew into a local town of Florencia, and me and I think it was the guy from, I think it was the Financial Times and Dallas Morning News. We shared a taxi down to the southern territory called San Vicente del Caguan. And, we got to the sort of the border of this, area. And we all had to get out and be searched by the guerrillas. And I mean, again, it was like going into another country. And they had a table set up, and we all had to hand over all our belongings and laptops. We all had laptops. And, they had to search the laptop and go through and, do the whole thing if it brought in explosives, and check out press passes if we were legitimate press and all that thing. And the thing is, it was fine. We all went, we got back in the taxi and proceeded on. But I mean, you never know what's going to happen to those, because again, the person doing the searching has power at that particular moment. So it's always like, how is this going to end up, and whether they're going to make up something and just, throw you out. I had another odd experience in Guyana. I went to Guyana to report on the oil industry there. And when I was leaving the country, I had sort of a duffel bag thing, and handed my passport to the immigration official, and she got very suspicious because I actually had a huge passport. I actually had to have more pages sewn in because I had traveled so much. I had all these different visas, and I was going in and out of Venezuela all the time. So she thought this was extremely suspect and very suspicious that I was going in and out of Venezuela, because it was drug trafficking and whatnot. So she sort of hailed somebody down to to get my bag that I'd already checked through to search. And I'm like, oh, great, now what's going to happen? So I saw them actually pull my bag off the plane. It had already been loaded, trundled across. And luckily she said, you stand here. And I got to watch her as she searched it. But it had sort of a hard bottom to it. There was a piece of cardboard or something, and it had a surface. She was convinced this was a double-bottomed thing, that it had a false bottom in it. So she just threw everything out, and she was going over that bottom of the duffel bag, really looking at the seams and how it was sewn in, and looking for any kind of opening. And and I'm just standing there like thinking, well, at least I'm watching this, because again, in these odd little countries, who knows what they do. So again, it was a little nerve-wracking, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I did interview the energy minister. I could call. I'm thinking, going through my mind, who I can phone if I get thrown into jail. But finally, she gave up, and she said, go ahead. So I had to repack everything, and onward I went. But I was like, oof, got out of that with a. But it was a bit, again, a little harrowing, because in that moment, your fate lies in this person's hands, and you just don't know in some of these places. So it was the same with the guerrillas.
I will say, I am kind of, I do admire that person's commitment to that, because sometimes when I walk through Heathrow or Gatwick or whatever, and I just see the nothing to declare area, I shit, sometimes they're not even paying attention. Obviously there's cameras everywhere, and I know, but it's I remember one time, this is a true story, I was coming back from Albania in 2007, and basically it was like a family holiday type deal, and I must have been 13, 14 at the time, something like that. I was young, and it was me and my mum and my stepdad, and my suitcase had a series of like decorative like swords. They were legit like Albanian sword, like you could kill someone with it. Like they were kind of mostly blunt though, like you'd have to sharpen them, but some of them were a bit sharper or whatever, but they were swords, right? Can't have that. And there was a few, mostly that was compromising, but I had like 3 or 4 of them in my suitcase. I don't know why, looking back, I thought that was a good idea, but then again, we wanted to bring it back. And I remember there was the, nothing to declare and something to declare gate. And I said to my mum, like, because we were walking towards the nothing to declare, and I was like, Mum, why are we going to the nothing to declare? We've got something to declare. And she's like, shut up. So we go through that gate, and we managed to essentially smuggle swords into the UK from Albania. But yeah, I do remember that they weren't really looking, and I suppose it does come down to like, looking suspicious, but I mean, anyone can look suspicious, especially right now. Like I understand back in the day after, 9/11 and 7/7 in London that, tensions were high and suspicions were higher, and that has changed travel forever. But by the same token, I do feel like sometimes it's very lax in certain places, and it's not that like security teams aren't on alert, but I do wonder like how they go about this, like what they base their decisions on who to search, who not to search. Like it's
they have profiles. I mean, I think they just have very specific profiles, and they go, there are dogs. I've seen,
right.
the drug sniffing dogs are often employed, and they're looking for anyone who's looking nervous. They do, if you're sweating, wiping away beads of, perspiration and how you answer and stuff like that. But yeah, she was convinced, this Guyanese official was convinced I was very suspicious. I had to be a drug trafficker. But again, they have less, people. I mean, Heathrow, of course, massive amounts of people going in and out. So they've got to, narrow it down, I guess, to certain profiles.
You once had your phone tapped in Venezuela. So how did this happen? How did you find out? And what was the aftermath of this?
Well, this was in Caracas, and I was covering, this was when Hugo Chavez was there and whatnot. And anyway, I was just, making phone calls as I did to phone different sources or on stories and whatnot. And one day I phoned one of the public, I think it was Time Magazine that I phoned in Mexico City, and I was on the phone to the guy, talking about whatever, and there was a clunk, and it was like this, every like few, I don't know, 30 seconds or something, and he stopped me. He's like, "You hear that?" And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Your phone's being tapped." And I said, "No." And he's like, "Yeah, that's the clunk." And I said, "Wow." So I put the phone down, and whatever, and I just thought, well, it could be, and then it lasted for about a week, and I could detect the clunk. And I mean, I was speaking in English. I don't know, they must have had English speakers listening in or what have you. They just wanted to check up on what I was doing, I suppose, what I was reporting and who I was. But again, I wasn't planning a coup or smuggling in weapons or anything. So there was nothing I could really do, but it was really funny. And then I mentioned it to another guy I knew at the Miami Herald, and I said, "Tim, somebody said this." And he's like, "Yeah, that's the noise, He's like, "I've had that too, So it was just an odd thing, and then it just faded off. Nothing ever happened with it. I mean, I wasn't really doing anything other than just calling on stories. And
So she didn't have to like get rid of that phone afterwards or something, or because surely
no,
once it's been tapped.
it was actually a landline. It was a terrestrial line. So
okay.
It was probably much easier to tap, than I don't know how they do it. I suppose it intercepts signals on cell phones, but it was a terrestrial line, so it was easy enough to get. But, and I mentioned it to other reporters if they, in the foreign press, and if they had, had that, and nobody seemed to have noticed. So I don't know if it was just me or they didn't like something that I wrote. I'm sure that was it, that something that I'd written, the government didn't like, so they decided to follow up on me and see what happened. But nothing ever happened. I never heard anything more about it, but, luckily. But again, when you're in these countries that monitor the press, again, it speaks to the whole free press issue, that's, it happens.
I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but like, how does it work for like foreign correspondents in those countries? Because I mean, obviously, you're coming from a country where you have a free press, you are allowed to report, but then, yeah, you're, as you say, you're being heavily kind of, I don't know how to put it, like surveilled,
Monitored.
Yeah, well, what kind of like, did they pose restrictions on you, or like, what exactly, how do they deal with you exactly?
They sometimes have I never had any kind of restrictions or anything. They will have like a press secretary in the government that deals just with the foreign press, and they know who you are and all that sort of thing. And you go if you want to, interview the president or what have you. We also had a foreign press association, so all the correspondents, we would get together for different events, or they might have some official minister who would speak just to us. And things like that. But I never, witnessed any kind of personal retaliation or anything. As I said, I did hear about it, a friend of mine in Brazil, that kind of thing. I did have my phone tapped, but I never got intimidated or anything. It was pretty free, I have to say. I don't know, I don't think it's like that now. I'm not really sure. Venezuela's really changed for the worst. But yeah, I mean, it depends on which country and which government's in.
Mm. You, I can't believe this. You once hid under a car to evade Guatemalan soldiers. I mean, talk us through like how this happened, and yeah, please just tell us about this. Like, this just blows my mind. It's like something out of a spy film.
Guatemala City, and my roommate was an American photographer, and she actually worked for a local Guatemala City daily paper. And there's a couple different stories with her, but anyway, she was doing this on the side, a sort of photo essay project thing on transvestites or transgender people in Venezuela, in Guatemala, who were kind of persecuted. They weren't well sort of received. And many of them worked as prostitutes in the middle of the night in downtown Zone 1 of Guatemala City, which is right downtown in the heart of the city, not the greatest area. So one night she wanted me to go with her just to keep her company, for safety, I suppose, because she was going to take some photos of these women on the street. So we went. So I went. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning. It was really cold. I'm really tired. I'm thinking, all right, I really want to go home. And she's busy, taking pictures and whatnot. And all of a sudden we hear like a rumble. I'm like, God, what's that? And then they're like, oh, it's the army. They're coming in the little tanks. And they also had them in Venezuela, like small tanks, not the big, Pens or World War II tanks, these little tanks, tanquetas, they called them. And they're like, oh, that's the army coming, quick, we have to hide. And I'm like, why do we have to hide? And she's like, they come and harass us and sometimes beat us up on the street. And at that time, the crime, the army was patrolling the streets because of the crime situation. So they employed the army to go around in these little tank things. And she's like, quick, we, they sort of pulled us down. So we had to the cars parked along the street. And so we just got under they just got under the cars, so that's what we had to do, was just get under the car and wait till the tank rolled by. They're like, because we did not, again, they would have stopped maybe and they would have hassled us. I don't know whether they would have done anything, but it was just, what are you doing out here? Why are you doing this? You're taking pictures, you're not allowed to do that. Or, it's just something you don't want to run into. So Sherry and I just, dove under the cars and waited till they went by, along with the women. We were all hiding under under the cars.
Did you see anything or witness anything, hear anything as they were going past, or when they did they stop and do anything anywhere? Or
No, luckily they went right on by, just rumbled on by, but it was just
okay.
odd because, you know, you could hear the sort of this rumble. And I'm like, what's that? Oh, the army's coming. And we were like, get under the cars, get under the cars. I'm like, what? Oh, yeah, just, and they were like pulling us to get under the cars. Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to people that want to become either a foreign correspondent or a journalist in general? What would be your sort of tips?
These days, you have to be sort of a very versatile multimedia reporter. You know, now with everything's online. You know, print is sort of dying a slow, maybe not even so slow death. So you have to be sort of versatile and shoot video, and, you know, be able to do video stories, be able to do audio stories, shoot your own photos, and write. You have to do all of these things kind of thing, which is a lot. It's a tall order, actually, to do all that stuff. And when you go on a story, each one of those components requires just a little bit of a different angle. You know, even taking photos, you need different requirements than you have to be right in the thick of it. Whereas for just reporting on a note, you know, writing notes on a note, you can stand back or something. You know, I mean, there's just different things. So, but that really, I think media outlets really look for that now as video capability, audio. You know, again, being able to do audio stories and visual and print. And if you want to be a foreign correspondent, again, you know, because of the internet, you know, a lot of the media outlets have that was the first thing to go, was foreign bureaus and foreign, you know, they just sort of slashed it and rely more on the wires, Reuters, AP, Bloomberg, you know, some of the big wire things. So if you want to make that happen, just go like I did. You know, you just have to pick a region that you're interested in. If it's Africa, go to Nairobi. That's where a lot of the African press is sort of based, and start freelancing, you know, to start making contacts and maybe work for a local paper, you know, if there's an English language paper or something that caters to the foreign community, and building contacts and start pitching stories to editors and that kind of thing.
So are you kind of fully moved out of that industry now, or do you sort of dabble a little bit? Like, obviously I know that you're writing on a professional basis, but is that within the world of journalism, or is that just completely unrelated now?
Yeah, it's completely unrelated at this point. It's basically corporate sort of things, speeches, press releases, talking points, you know, the occasional sort of article for a corporate blog or NGO blog or something like that. But yeah, the straight journalism, yeah, I'm out of at this point.
Why did you choose to move out of it?
That's a whole other story. I actually ended up tearing the tendons in my forearms.
Oh, right.
And from typing, you know, I mean,
fair enough.
Who would you'd get injury from, you know, typing? But I did. After many, many years of typing on deadline, you know, I had incredible pain in my arms, and I had to go to a couple doctors, and finally one said, you know, you can't do this anymore. So I had to, that ended my journalism career, basically, you know.
So, like, how have you kind of overcome that? Obviously, because you're still writing, you're just not writing as frequently as you were. Like, how did you overcome that and that injury?
Yeah, I finally found what they call PRP therapy, platelet-rich plasma therapy, and they take some blood out of the injured area and put it in a centrifuge, and it spins out the platelets, and they put back the platelets into it. It's like this super dose of your own regenerative platelets, and that actually worked. Really alleviated the pain and whatnot, and a lot of athletes do it, you know, for knee injuries and that sort of thing. And then I've just had to manage. I use these sort of braces on my forearm.
Yeah.
Type, and I also type with styluses like this. So I look rather odd when I'm typing in, you know, public. People are always like looking at me. But that actually works, and I just have to kind of limit myself. About 4 hours a day is my max, or just really kind of make sure I rest my arms.
Excellent, excellent. As we draw things to a close today, do you have any kind of final thoughts or upcoming projects that you'd like to share with us?
Well, as I said, I'm releasing this book on Girl on the Brink in Spanish, and it's going to have a new cover and everything. That'll hopefully be April, as well as a new edition of the English and a new edition of the that's the Skin of Tattoos book, with a new publisher. And I'm working on a mystery novel, so my goal is to finish that this year. And try and get a publisher for that, Asian publisher. And then, so that's really my immediate goals. And yeah, words of advice, follow your heart. You have to follow your passion. I mean, that's really what I've done my whole life, and it's worked out. It really has worked out. You have to try and find ways to do what you want to do, what you love to do. And sometimes it isn't the traditional way. You have to take a detour. Sometimes you have to put up with doing, crap work for a while and saving up, building a bank account, and then you can do it. Or, but I think you have to think sort of in the long term, what you really want to do and do it, And if you're not sure what you want to do, try different things. Don't be afraid. I think my key thing, I think most people are held back by fear. Yes. And fear is what really just scared to quit their job and do something. And, don't be foolhardy about it, but, be practical and just try and push through the fear and you'll get to the other side.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to say this has been fantastic. So real big thank you for agreeing to be on this podcast and sharing all these different stories and just, sharing your life in general. I'm sure our listeners will be over the moon to listen to this, to watch this as well. No, honestly, you have a very fascinating story in various different ways. And it's a real pleasure to listen to. And, I wish you the absolute best with your writing career and everything in the future.
Yeah, likewise with your podcasting career. I'll be following along, subscribing.
Thank you very much.
Where it goes.
And no, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for being on the show. And to all my listeners, if you're enjoying the podcast and you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or whichever audio platform that you listen to the podcast, make sure you are following, make sure you're sharing this, interacting with it, rating, the podcast, because all of those efforts are going to help me with my goal of getting a sponsor. This is my immediate goal for this podcast, is to get a sponsor. We can do this, but only with your support. And equally, if you would like to see a certain guest on this show in the future, hear a specific topic in the future, let me know. I'm always active on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. So reach out to me, let me know your thoughts, good or bad. I want to hear everything. And obviously for YouTube, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And that's, am I done with the plugin? Yeah. Thank you very much for listening to the Christian Reeve podcast. And until next time, peace out, we'll laugh. I'll see you in the next one.